Good day. I want to break down the first assignment, homework assignment, the reading and the podcast on the 3 dimensions of a complete life. Once again, this was a speech from Martin Luther King Jr. from 1967 in Chicago. And so let's get into these 3. So the first is the length. And what Martin Luther King Jr. is suggesting here is that the first component or the foundation is to have love for yourself. In other words, to have a concern for yourself and even a desire to develop yourself. And so there is this healthy self-interest, this desire for more for yourself. And really what it's about is, what do we do with this desire for growth, for learning, for truth? And Martin Luther King Jr. talks about how that's just a natural, healthy piece. He talks about it. I love the analogy he uses about learning how to accept ourselves for who we really are, our strengths and our weaknesses. And he talks about the danger, or, the problem that we can have where we are a Ford, but we think of ourselves as a Cadillac. And so we could just dismiss ourselves because we're not a Cadillac, but actually there are benefits to being a Ford. You can fit into parking spots that a Cadillac can't. And then once we really recognize that, we respond to our vocation. So God has a unique work for each of us, depending on our gifts and our talents. And we just have to come to recognize what those are. So what's the danger in this love for self? So one is that if it just ends there, it can be utilitarian. And if you remember, utilitarian is that we just approach life for what's in me, what is in it for me, and we use other people, and that's a danger. And of course, you spoke about that before in the theology of the body, like the way that you could approach dating. It's like, oh, what am I looking for in a future partner? Or what do I want in a long-term commitment? And that's part of it. But if that's all you're concerned about, then you're going to use people. Okay. Second category, the breadth, or the second dimension, rather. We have to love our neighbor, according to Martin Luther King Jr. And so it's an outward concern for others. It's our invitation to be a man with and for others. It's a way in which we can really get outside of ourselves and love. And so he talks about the classic scripture parable of the Good Samaritan. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because he says, what causes the priest and the Levite to walk on by? It's fear. It's fear. It's fear for our own safety. And so what he suggests is that fear really can run our life, whether or not we're even conscious of this fear, and it could shrink our world, that we don't see the need in front of us, or we don't have the capacity to do anything. And we're always thinking about what will happen to me. And really what the invitation is what will happen to this other person. He suggests, of course, we've got the the length and the breadth. And then the third dimension is the height, this upward reach, this going deep within us to come to know God, this search for truth, this longing for justice. And we are made for God. We're not going to be complete until we find our home in God. And Ignatius, of course, is going to talk about this in discernment of the spirits that we're going to get into vocation. We talked a little bit about this in the first principle and foundation. So the issue is that Martin Luther King says is that there are many kinds of atheism, and a lot of times we don't even know we're an atheist. So we have the atheism of thought. That's kind of like Karl Marx, who's pictured here. But then there's also the atheism of action, where the way we live our lives. And a lot of you were talking about how you may know something about religion, but there isn't much space in your life for a relationship with God, with the way it feels like it's so many distractions. And that's kind of what he's talking about, this piece about action. All right.